Hi everybody, I'm back. And you may have noticed I've been recording these segments of the story on the same day, and I suddenly look very different in the fourth part that I did in parts 1, 2, and 3. And that's because I snuck off to my neighbour for a haircut. Luckily, my next door neighbour is a hairdresser, and she said, "Yep, pop round now." So I popped round now, trimmed the hair, trimmed the beard, and I have to say, 10 years younger. Feels great. Anyway, welcome back to my channel, Book Time with Elvis, with me, Mark, and I hope so much you're doing very well, and I hope you've been enjoying the story. It is, of course, the Old Nurse's Story by Elizabeth Gaskell, and we're currently on part 4, and this is being done for an event called Ghosts of Christmas Past Resurrected, an event hosted by the amazing Vin from Remnant Reads, and a load of other wonderful and amazing co-hosts, of which I count myself lucky to be part of. We are on part 4, and I'm very curious as to where young Miss Rosamond went with this mysterious girl hand in hand. We left them heading towards the east corner of the house, and now let's continue the story. "Now, you are a naughty little girl, and telling stories," said I. "What would your good mamma that is in heaven, and never told a story in her life, say to her little Rosamond? If she heard her, and I dare say she does, telling stories." "Indeed, Hester," sobbed out my child, "I'm telling you true, indeed I am." "Don't tell me," said I, very stern. "I tracked you by your footmarks through the snow, and there were only yours to be seen, and if you had had a little girl to go hand in hand with you up the hill, don't you think the footprints would have gone along with yours?" "I can't help it, dear, dear Hester," said she, crying. "If they did not, I never looked at her feet, but she held my hand fast and tight in her little one, and it was very, very cold. She took me up the fell path, up to the holly trees, and there I saw a lady weeping and crying. But when she saw me, she hushed her weeping, and smiled very proud and grand, and took me on her knee, and began to lull me to sleep. And that's all, Hester. But that is true, and my dear mamma knows it is," said she, crying. So I thought the child was in a fever, and pretended to believe her as she went over her story over and over again, and always the same. At last Dorothy knocked on the door with Miss Rosamond's breakfast, and she told me the old ladies were down in the eating parlour, and that they wanted to speak to me. They had both been into the night nursery the evening before, but it was after Miss Rosamond was asleep, so they had only looked at her, not asked me any questions. I shall catch it, thought I to myself, as I went along to the north gallery. And yet, I thought, taking courage, it was in their charge I left her, and it's they that's to blame for letting her steal away unknown and unwatched. So I went in boldly and told my story. I told it all to Miss Furnivall, shouting it close to her ear. But when I came to the mention of the other little girl out in the snow, coaxing and tempting her out, and willing her up to the grand and beautiful lady by the holly tree, she threw her arms up, her old and withered arms, and cried aloud, "Oh, heaven, forgive, have mercy!" Mrs. Stark took hold of her roughly, even, I thought, but she was past Mrs. Stark's management and spoke to me in a kind of wild warning and authority. "Hester, keep her from that child. It will lure her to her death. That evil child. Tell her it is a wicked, naughty child." Then Mrs. Stark... I just got shivers up my spine then. Then Mrs. Stark hurried me out of the room, where indeed I was glad enough to go. But Miss Furnivall kept shrieking out, "Oh, have mercy, wilt thou never forgive? It is many a long year ago." I was very uneasy in my mind after that. I durst never leave Miss Rosamond night or day, for fear lest she might slip off again after some fancy or other, and all the more because I thought I could make out that Miss Furnivall was crazy from their odd ways about her. And I was afraid lest something of the same kind, which might be in the family, hung over my darling. And the great frost never ceased all this time, and, whenever it was a more stormy night than usual, between the gusts and through the wind, we heard the old lord playing on the great organ. But old lord or not, wherever Miss Rosamond went, there I followed, for my love for her, pretty helpless orphan, was stronger than my fear for the grand and terrible sound. Besides, it rested with me to keep her cheerful and merry, as beseemed her age. So we played together and wandered together here and there and everywhere, for I never dared to lose sight of her again in that large and rambling house. And so it happened that one afternoon, not long before Christmas Day, we were playing together on the billiard table in the great hall. Not that we knew the right way of playing, but she liked to roll the smooth ivory balls with her pretty hands, and I liked to do whatever she did, and by, without our noticing it, It grew dusk indoors, though it was still light in the open air, and I was thinking of taking her back into the nursery when all of a sudden she cried out, "Look! Hester, look! There is my poor little girl out there in the snow." I turned towards the long narrow windows, and there, sure enough, I saw a little girl, less than my Miss Rosamond, dressed all unfit to be out of doors, such a bitter night, crying and beating against the window panes as if she wanted to be let in. Whew. She seemed to sob and wail till Miss Rosamond could bear it no longer, and was flying to the door to open it, when all of a sudden, and close upon us, the great organ pealed out so loud and thundering, it fairly made me tremble, and all the more when I remembered me that, even in the stillness of that dead cold weather, I had heard no sound of little battering hands upon the window glass, although the phantom child had seemed to put forth all its force, and although I had seen it wail and cry, no faintest touch of sound had fallen upon my ears. Whether I remembered all this at the very moment, I do not know. The great organ sound had so stunned me into terror, but this I know. I caught up Miss Rosamond before she got the hall door open, and clutched her and carried her away, kicking and screaming, into the large bright kitchen, where Dorothy and Agnes were busy with their mince pies. "What is the matter with my sweet one?" cried Dorothy, as I bore in Miss Rosamond, who was sobbing as if her heart would break. "She won't let me open the door for my little girl to come in, and she'll die if she's out on the fells all night. Cruel, naughty Hester," she said, slapping me. But she might have struck harder, for I had seen a look of ghastly terror on Dorothy's face, which made my very blood run cold, and I had to say mine too, actually. Ooh. "Shut the back kitchen door fast and bolt it well," said she to Agnes. "She is no more. She gave me raisins and almonds to quiet Miss Rosamond, but she sobbed about the little girl in the snow and would not touch any of the good things. I was thankful when she cried herself to sleep in bed. Then I stole down to the kitchen and told Dorothy I'd made up my mind. I would carry my darling back to my father's house in Applethwaite, where, if we lived humbly, we lived at peace. I said I had been frightened enough with the old lord's organ playing, but now that I had seen for myself this little moaning child, all decked out as no child in the neighbourhood could be, beating and battering to get in, yet always without any sound or noise, with a dark wound on its right shoulder, and that Miss Rosamond had known it again for the phantom that had nearly lured her to her death, which Dorothy knew was true, I would stand it no longer. I saw Dorothy change colour once or twice when I had done. She told me she did not think I could take Miss Rosamond with me, for that she was my lord's ward, and I had no right over her, and she asked me, would I leave the child that I was so fond of, just for sounds and sights that could do me no harm, and that they had all had to get used to in their turns? I was all in a hot trembling passion, and I said it was very well for her to talk, that knew what these sights and noises betokened, and that had perhaps had something to do with the spectre child while it was alive. And I taunted her so that she told me all she knew at last, and then I wished I had never been told, for it only made me more afraid than ever. She said she had heard the tale from old neighbours that were alive when she was first married, when folks used to come to the hall sometimes, before it had got such a bad name on the countryside. It might not be true, or it might be what she had been told. The old lord was Miss Furnivall's father, Miss Grace, as Dorothy called her, for Miss Maud was the elder, and Miss Furnivall by rights. The old lord was eaten up with pride. Such a proud man was never seen or heard of, and his daughters were like him. No one was good enough to wed them, although they had choice enough, for they were the great beauties of their day, as I had seen by their portraits, where they hung in the state drawing-room. But, as the old saying is, pride will have a fall, and these two haughty beauties fell in love with the same man, and he no better than a foreign musician, whom their father had down from London to play music with him at the manor house. For above all things, next to his pride, the old lord loved music. He could play on nearly every instrument that ever was heard of, and it was a strange thing, it did not soften him, but he was a fierce, dour old man, and had broken his poor wife's heart with his cruelty, they said. He was mad after music, and would pay any money for it. So he got this foreigner to come, who made such beautiful music that they said the very birds on the trees stopped their singing to listen. And by degrees this foreign gentleman got such a hold over the old lord that nothing would serve him but that he must come every year, and it was he that had the great organ brought from Holland and built up in the hall where it stood now. He taught the old lord to play on it, but many a time, when Lord Furnivall was thinking of nothing but his fine organ and his finer music, the dark foreigner was walking abroad in the woods with one of the young ladies, now Miss Maud, and then Miss Grace. So we're going to leave it there, everybody. Ooh, that was a bit of a chilly one, that one, wasn't it? Let's see what tomorrow brings. Do take care. Bye.